Welcome everybody to Victor's Forbidden Desire. Please do enjoy this next video.
The body in the ditch was not dead. That was the first thing Colt Duvain noticed when he pulled back on the reins and squinted through dust off the trail. A man lay face down in the dry red creek bed, one arm stretched ahead as though reaching for something dropped, the other folded beneath his chest. His shirt was torn along the back. The marks looked like work of a boot heel used without mercy. A horse stood 10 yards off reins, trailing grazing on yellow grass without concern. The man's chest moved. Barely, but it moved. That was enough to make Colt do something he had been telling himself for 3 years he no longer did. He got involved. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. Tell us where you are watching from and subscribe. The Colt Duvain had not always been the kind of man who passed through towns without leaving a name. There had been a version of him once, younger and considerably more foolish, who believed the frontier was a place where a man could be both brave and honest at the same time. The war had corrected that notion, not the battles themselves, though those had taken their own toll in ways he still felt in his right shoulder on cold mornings. But the silences afterward, the long rides home, the conversations no one was willing to have, the things a man learned about himself in the dark of a campaign tent that he was then expected to pretend he had never learned at all. He had come west after that, the way many men did, not because the West held something for them, but because it was simply the furthest direction available. 3 years of riding fence line for one outfit or another, never staying past a single season, keeping his head down and his opinions to himself. He had grown expert at the particular skill of being invisible. A man who did not linger long enough to become memorable was a man who would never have to answer hard questions. But the man in the ditch changed his plans, the way the worst interruptions always do, not with fanfare, but with simple, undeniable need. Colt tied his horse to a juniper branch and climbed down the shallow bank, his boots sliding on the loose red rock. Up close, the man was bigger than he had looked from the road. Broad through the shoulders, long in the leg, hands that were roughened and scarred from years of work. His hair was dark and thick and cut badly, in the way men cut their own hair when there was no one around to do it for them. The marks on his back were worse up close, 4 or 5 distinct lash marks, dried blood sitting dark in the dust-caked creases of his skin. Colt pressed 2 fingers to the side of the man's throat. The pulse was slow but steady, like a clock that had not wound down yet but was thinking about it. He rolled him carefully onto his side, and the man made a sound, low and involuntary, the sound a person makes when pain finds them, even in unconsciousness. His face was something Colt was not prepared for. A strong jaw gone slack with exhaustion. A nose that had been broken once and healed slightly crooked. Dark brows knitted together, even in the deep unconscious drift of a man pushed past his limit. A mouth that was, even in that condition, the kind of mouth that occupied a thought longer than it ought to. Colt looked away from the face and focused on the damage. He had seen men worked over like this before. Usually it was a matter of money or land or both. Sometimes it was something a man had said in the wrong saloon to the wrong ears. Sometimes it was something else entirely. The kind of thing that never got spoken out loud, but that everyone in the county somehow knew anyway. In every case, the result looked more or less the same. A human being reduced to a collection of hurts, left somewhere inconvenient, and expected to either die or take the lesson. Colt pulled his canteen off his shoulder and uncapped it. He lifted the man's head with one hand, tilting the canteen carefully with the other, and the man drank without waking, which told Colt 2 things. 1, he was very far under. 2, his body still knew what it wanted. He drank 4 slow swallows before Colt pulled the canteen back and laid his head down again on the folded blanket he had pulled from his saddle roll. The horse that had been grazing wandered closer now, nosing at Colt's hat brim with a kind of presumptuous affection that suggested it was used to people and not afraid of them. Good horse then, well kept. Whatever else had happened to this man, he had been careful with his animal, which told Colt a third thing. He was the kind of man who paid attention to things that depended on him. He built a small fire in the hollow of the creek bed, more for the warmth than for light, and sat beside it while the sun finished going down and the first cold of the evening came in off the flats. The man began to surface about an hour after dark. Not all at once, but in stages, the way consciousness returned to someone who had reason to be cautious about waking. First the hands, flexing slowly against the blanket, then the eyes, opening a crack, then closing again, then opening wider, then the voice, dry as gravel, low as a root. "Where in the hell?" "Easy," Colt said. He kept his voice at the same level he used for spooked horses. "You fell, or were put. Either way, you were in a ditch. I pulled you out." The man tried to sit up and made it about halfway before the lash marks on his back introduced themselves to the situation, and he hissed through his teeth and stopped moving. "Do not," Colt said. The man lay back. His eyes found Colt across the fire and stayed there for a moment. He reading him the way a man reads a contract he has been handed by someone he does not trust. Whatever he found in the reading seemed to satisfy him well enough for now. He let out a slow breath and stared up at the black strip of sky above the creek bed walls. "My name is Fletcher Vane," he said, like it was something he needed to establish before anything else could happen. "Colt Duvane," Colt said. Fletcher Vane processed this with his eyes on the sky. "You a lawman?" "No." "Bounty man?" "No." "Then what are you?" "Just a man who was riding the same direction," Colt said. "Nothing more than that." Fletcher looked at him again. In the firelight, his eyes were the color of dark water. There were things moving in them that he was clearly not going to put into words. At least not tonight. At least not for a stranger. That was fine. Colt had his own inventory of unspoken things. He understood the practice. "The men who did this," Colt said after a while, "they gonna come back looking for you?" It was not a question. Fletcher seemed to understand that. "Probably," Fletcher said. He paused. "There is a ranch, 4 miles north. I can make it." "You can barely make upright," Colt said. Fletcher considered this with what appeared to be genuine fairness. Then he said, "I know, but I cannot stay here on the road. I have." He stopped. "People at the ranch." "People," Colt said. Fletcher did not elaborate, his jaw set in a particular way, the way a door closes when there is something behind it being kept in. Colt poured water over a strip of cloth and handed it across the fire. "For your back," he said. "The cuts are not deep, but they need cleaning." Fletcher took the cloth without comment. He reached back with considerable effort and began pressing it against the lash marks. His face did not change expression. The man had a high tolerance for pain, or a long history of not allowing pain to show itself on his face. Possibly both. "I will take you," Colt said. Fletcher looked up. 4 miles is 4 miles, Colt said. "In your condition in the dark on your own, you are a risk to yourself and your horse. I will take you and then continue on my way. It is not a debt, and it does not require repayment. It is just the practical thing." Something moved in Fletcher's expression, a softening so brief it might have been a trick of the fire. Then it closed back over. "All right," Fletcher said. He paused again, and what came next was quieter and cost him something to say. Colt could hear the price of it in the flatness of the tone. "Thank you." They made the 4 miles in just over an hour, riding slow, Colt keeping pace with Fletcher's horse instead of ahead of it. Fletcher sat his saddle with the rigid, upright posture of a man who was refusing to let the pain make decisions for him. It was the most stubborn piece of riding Colt had seen in some time. He watched it from the corner of his eye and felt something he did not immediately have a name for. Admiration was close. Concern was also in the vicinity. The ranch came into view with the moon behind it, a solid dark shape against a lighter dark sky, a water tower, a barn, a main cabin with yellow light in one window, good fences, organized. Not prosperous exactly, but maintained with the kind of attention that meant someone had decided it was worth keeping. A dog came out to meet them, tail going, no barking. It went straight to Fletcher and put its front feet on his stirrup, and Fletcher reached down and laid one big hand briefly on the dog's head. The gesture was so natural and unguarded that Colt felt he had seen something he was not supposed to see. Not because it was secret exactly, but because it was real in a way that most things people did in front of strangers were not. They dismounted at the corral. Fletcher moved carefully, one hand braced on the fence rail. Colt unsaddled both horses without being asked and turned them in. "There is a bunk in the barn," Fletcher said. His back was to Colt. "You can stay the night. Ride out in the morning when there is light." "I appreciate it," Colt said. "There is a woman in the house," Fletcher said then. He said it in an odd way, not conversationally, not as information exactly, more like a flag being planted. "My wife. Her name is Clara. She will bring food if I ask her." Colt did not say anything. "I just want you to know," Fletcher said. He seemed to have run out of the specific thing he wanted to say. He did not look around. "I have a wife," he said again, quieter the second time, as though repeating it might make it mean something different. "I heard you the first time," Colt said, keeping his voice even and entirely without inflection. Fletcher finally turned. In the moonlight his face was unreadable, but his eyes were not. There was something urgent and frightened behind them that had nothing to do with the men who had beaten him. Nay, Colt held the look for exactly as long as it took for him to understand what he was actually looking at. Then he looked away, toward the barn. "I will be comfortable in the barn," Colt said. "Good night, Fletcher." He went inside and found a clean bunk in the hay-smelling dark, and lay down without lighting a lamp, and stared at the boards above him for a long time before sleep came. Outside, the wind moved through the cottonwoods beside the water tank, a sound like something being spoken very quietly, in a language that had no exact translation. The morning was cold and blue, and the rooster made his opinions known before the sky had finished deciding on a color. Colt was already up, having slept in the half-surface way of a man accustomed to uncertain accommodations, aware of every shift in the sounds outside. He heard the cabin door open, heard boots on the porch steps, a pause, then the creak of the barn door. Fletcher came in carrying a tin plate and a cup. Biscuits, salt pork, black coffee. He set them on the edge of the bunk without ceremony. "You did not have to," Colt said. "Clara made it," Fletcher said. He stayed standing, one shoulder against the barn post, looking somewhere in the middle distance. His back was bandaged now, strips of white cloth visible at the edges of a clean shirt. Clara's work, presumably. His face in the morning light was still marked from the beating, but less alarming than the night before. His color was better. "How are you?" Colt asked. "Fine," Fletcher said, which was clearly not the answer to the question, but was the only answer available. Colt ate the biscuits. They were good. Clara, whoever she was, could cook. The coffee was strong and real, not the brown water that passed for coffee in most of the places Colt had been sleeping lately. "Those men who beat you," Colt said, when he had finished most of the plate. "They have a reason to come back." Fletcher's jaw moved. He was working something over in his mind. Some calculation about how much to say and to whom. It was a calculation Colt recognized from the inside. "There is land they want," Fletcher said finally. "Grazing rights. South pasture goes to water in the dry season. I am the only one who holds it, who will not sell." He paused. "Darnell Critch owns most everything else in this county. He collects what he does not own by other means." Colt set the tin cup down, and the beating was the other means. One version of it. Fletcher looked at his hands, braced on the post above him. "There have been other versions. Missing cattle. A fence line burned." He stopped. "Clara does not know all of it. I have not wanted her to." Colt thought about the flag being planted in the moonlight the night before, the way it had been said. "I have a wife." The specific desperation of it. He looked at Fletcher Vane in the barn light, morning coming in blue and gold through the gaps in the boards, and said nothing at all for a moment. Sometimes nothing at all was the more accurate response. "I can stay a few days," Colt said, "if it would be useful." Fletcher looked at him sharply, that careful, assessing look again, like reading a contract. "I have no wages to offer," Fletcher said. "I did not ask for wages. Then why?" Colt shrugged. "I have nowhere particular to be." It was true, and it was also not the whole truth, and they both seemed to understand that without discussing it. Fletcher looked away again. The dog came in and sat on Colt's foot and panted up at him with complete goodwill. "There are fence posts need setting on the east line," Fletcher said after a while. "If you're going to be here, you might as well be useful. "That's my general preference," Colt said. Something happened in the corner of Fletcher's mouth. Not quite a smile, but related to one. Then he pushed off the post and walked back toward the cabin. He walked carefully, but he walked straight. The dog stayed on Colt's foot a moment longer, then got up and followed its owner. Colt sat in the quiet barn in the blue morning light and finished his coffee. Clara Vane was a small and direct woman with red hair, cut practical and quick gray eyes that missed nothing. She fed Colt at the table that first noon without any ceremony or excessive hospitality, the way a sensible person offers a meal to someone who needs one. She asked where he had come from and where he was headed, and seemed to accept answers that were incomplete without pushing at them. She was kind to her husband in a way that was also practical, refilling his coffee without making it a performance, asking about his back without making it a drama. Fletcher accepted both the coffee and the inquiry with a kind of affectionate distance, the way a man treats something precious and familiar that he has not quite figured out how to hold correctly. Colt watched them from the position of a stranger at a table and tried to understand the architecture of what he was looking at. There was genuine warmth between them. There was no cruelty and no pretense of the theatrical kind. What there was, underneath all of it, was a careful space that neither of them spoke about. The space where a certain kind of truth would have gone if either of them had known how to put it there. It was not his business. He had enough of his own unspoken interior to manage without cataloging someone else's. The east fence took 2 days. The posts were rotted through in 6 places, and the wire had sagged and tangled in a stretch that had probably been buckling since spring. Colt and Fletcher worked it side by side, not talking much, which was fine. The language of fence work was mostly physical. Ease the set of a post hole, the tension of the wire, the angle of a mallet swing. They fell into a rhythm that did not require conversation, the kind of working rhythm that developed between people who were not competing against each other. It was a companionable quiet. Colt had not experienced it in some time. The third morning he came out of the barn before dawn and found Fletcher sitting on the top rail of the corral, smoking. The sky to the east was that particular shade of dark blue that came just before the dark gave up entirely. Fletcher did not turn around when Colt approached, but he moved slightly on the rail, a fractional shift that was not quite an invitation and not quite not one. Colt leaned on the fence below him and looked out at the same patch of pre-dawn nothing. "They will come again," Fletcher said. "Critch's men." "I expect so," Colt said. "There is only one of me," Fletcher said, "and I cannot." He stopped. "I cannot leave Clara on her own." He paused. "Even if I wanted to ride out and face it somewhere other than here, I cannot do that." "I understand," Colt said. "Do you?" Fletcher said. He did not say it pointedly. He said it like a real question, tired at the edges, like a question he had been carrying for a long time. Colt looked up at him in the pre-dawn blue. Fletcher was looking at the eastern ridge where the sky was starting to make up its mind. His profile in that light was something Colt was having a harder and harder time not looking at directly, which was its own particular problem. "More than you might think," Colt said. Fletcher smoked. After a while he said, "I built this place. Every post, every board, 6 years. He paused. Some men build things because they want something to leave behind. Some men build things because they need something to hold on to." He was quiet for a moment. "I am the second kind." Colt said nothing. There was nothing to add to that. After another silence, Fletcher said, "You have never asked me about the beating." "No," Colt said. "Most men would have asked. Most men would not have stopped at the ditch either," Colt said. Fletcher looked down at him then. They were close in that particular way that fence rails and pre-dawn solitude arranged without asking permission. Fletcher above and Colt below, and the space between them not very much at all. Fletcher's eyes in the growing light were that dark watercolor again, and there were things in them that had no names. In any language, Colt spoke out loud. Fletcher looked away. "It is starting to get light," he said. "Clara will be up." "Yes," Colt said. Fletcher dropped off the fence on the far side and walked toward the barn to start the morning feeding. Colt stayed where he was a moment longer, hands on the rail, looking at the eastern ridge as the dark blue broke open into something the color of old copper. He had nowhere particular to be. That had been true when he said it. It was getting truer by the day, which was the thing about truths of that specific kind. They did not stay the same size. They grew into whatever space you gave them, quiet and inexorable and absolute, like water finding the low places in the rock. The trouble came on the 5th day, the way trouble tended to in those places in that time, without announcement, in the full glare of a working afternoon, not as though it felt no need to hide itself. 3 riders came in from the south road at a pace that was not quite a gallop, but was not anything that wished to be mistaken for a social call. They pulled up at the gate and did not dismount, which was the particular rudeness of men who wanted to make a point about where they thought they stood in relation to the man on foot. Colt was at the water trough when they arrived. Fletcher came out of the barn. Clara appeared at the cabin door and read the scene in about 4 seconds and went back inside, which was the right call. The lead rider was heavy-set and pale-eyed and wore the specific expression of a man who had been told he was important often enough to believe it absolutely. He did not look at Colt at first. He looked at Fletcher. "Critch wants an answer," the man said. "You have had 3 weeks. Fletcher's hands were easy at his sides. He had a stillness about him when he was angry that Colt had come to recognize in the previous days, a settling inward, a quieting of all unnecessary motion, the stillness of a man who had decided something and was waiting for events to catch up to the decision. "My answer is the same," Fletcher said. "It was always the same. It will stay the same." The lead rider looked at Colt for the first time. His pale eyes ran over him with the practiced dismissal of a man who had learned to assess the usefulness of other men quickly. A hired hand, he decided, and discarded the assessment. "He does not pay you enough to take a beating for him," the man said to Colt. "He does not pay me at all," Colt said. His voice was friendly and informative. "So you can leave that particular consideration off the table." The rider's pale eyes stopped dismissing. They started recalculating. "The south pasture," the lead rider said again to Fletcher. "Critch is a patient man, but patience has a price." "So does the south pasture," Fletcher said. The riders looked at each other. Something passed between them that was the pre-language of a decision being made. Colt had seen that particular look before, in saloons and in canyon mouths and across tables in back rooms of sheriff's offices in 3 separate territories. He knew what it meant, and he knew approximately how long it took to complete itself. He had moved to the left and slightly forward before they had finished deciding. What happened in the next 2 minutes was more efficient than dramatic, which was generally the way things went when one of the parties involved was not interested in theater. There was a gun drawn, and then not drawn, because the hand that had started drawing it was occupied with other considerations. There was a horse that shied and unseated its rider. There was an amount of shouting that did not accomplish anything. At the end of it, 2 of the 3 riders were on the ground, and none of them were badly hurt, which was a choice Colt had made deliberately, because badly hurt men belonged to the man who hurt them, and he had no interest in acquiring Critch's riders as a permanent concern. He just wanted them to leave. They left. Fletcher stood very still throughout, and then stood very still after. The dog barked at the retreating dust, and then lost interest. Colt picked his hat up from where it had landed. "You have done this before," Fletcher said. His voice was entirely level. It was not an accusation. "Here and there," Colt said. Fletcher looked at him for a long moment. Then he walked toward the barn. In the doorway he stopped. He did not turn around. "Colt," he said. His voice had changed. It was quieter, and it was carrying something it had not been carrying 5 minutes ago. Colt waited. "I am going to ask you something," Fletcher said. "And I am going to ask you to." He stopped. To just hear it without making it into more than it is, or less than it is. "All right," Colt said. There was a silence. A horse moved inside the barn. The cottonwoods shifted. "Would you stay?" Fletcher said. "Not permanently, just." He stopped again. He was not a man who stumbled on words, and the stumbling was costing him something visible. A while longer, and Colt said, "Yes." Fletcher's shoulders changed shape. Something let go in them that had been held a long time. "Good," Fletcher said, very quietly, and went into the barn. Colt looked at the south road where the dust of Critch's riders was still thinning on the air, and then at the cabin where Clara had appeared in the doorway again, watching him with those quick gray eyes that missed nothing. She looked at him for a moment. Then she went inside. The afternoon was very bright, and the silence left by the departing riders was specific and total, the way silence was after something had been decided. Colt put his hat back on and went to help with the evening feeding. That night he could not sleep. Not the ordinary restlessness of an unfamiliar place, but something else. A wakefulness with a particular texture, an awareness of the ranch around him, the sounds of it, the horse breathing in the stall nearby, the wind in the cottonwoods, the creak of the cabin's boards when someone inside turned over in the night. He lay in the dark of the barn and considered the situation with the precision of a man who had been avoiding exactly this kind of situation for 3 years and was now in it up to the collarbone and sinking slowly. It was not new, the situation, the particular shape of the wanting. He had been acquainted with it since before the war, had spent a considerable portion of his adult life constructing careful distances between himself and it. The West had been useful for that. Distance was the West's primary product. You could ride a week in one direction and encounter nothing that required you to be any particular kind of man. But then, a man lay in a ditch on a road you happened to be riding, and you stopped, and the shape of him in the firelight was the shape of something you had been putting distance between yourself and for a very long time. Colt put his arm over his face in the dark and breathed slowly and told himself the various sensible things he had always told himself in these situations. None of them were less true than they had ever been. None of them felt like they were doing the same amount of work they used to do. Outside, the wind moved in the cottonwoods. After a while, he heard the barn door open, very quietly, the way a man opens a door when he is trying not to wake someone. A pause. Colt did not move. "Fletcher," Colt said. A silence. "Yes," Fletcher said from the dark near the door. Colt took his arm off his face. He looked at the boards above him, where the moonlight came in thin and silver through the cracks. "What are you doing up?" Colt said. "Could not sleep," Fletcher said. "Nor could I," Colt said. Another silence, long enough that the wind had time to move through the cottonwoods twice. The horse shifted in its stall. The barn smelled of hay and earth and the cold particular smell of a high plains night. Fletcher moved, not toward the door, in. The creak of a stool being pulled somewhere in the dark, the sound of a man sitting down. "There is a thing," Fletcher said, very quietly, "that I have not said to anyone." He stopped. Colt waited. "Not to Clara," Fletcher said. "Not to anyone. Not in my life." He was quiet for a moment. "I do not know if I know how to say it." "You do not have to say it," Colt said. "I know," Fletcher said. He was quiet for another moment, but I think. He stopped. "I think I might want to." Colt said nothing. He lay in the dark and felt his own pulse, steady and too fast, the way it went when something was about to happen that could not be unhappened. "I have wanted," Fletcher said, very slowly, as though finding each word individually in a room with no light, "my whole life, to be seen by someone who—" He stopped, who already understood what they were seeing, who did not need it explained, who would not. He did not finish the sentence, but the shape of what the sentence would have been was clear in the space where it stopped. Colt sat up in the dark. He could not see Fletcher, but he knew roughly where he was, 3 or 4 feet away in the dark of the barn, sitting on a stool, having said the closest thing he had ever said to the truth. "I understand," Colt said. The silence after that had a different quality than the silences before it. Fletcher's breath in the dark, unsteady. "Colt," he said. "Yes," Colt said. "I have a wife," Fletcher said, the same way he had said it the first night, in the dark outside, planting the flag. But different, smaller this time, as though he knew what it meant and what it did not mean at the same time. "I know," Colt said. "And," Fletcher said, the word alone on the air, just the word, "and." Colt swung his legs over the side of the bunk and sat on the edge of it in the dark, 4 feet between them, the dark and the hay smell and the thin silver moonlight through the boards and 4 feet of night air. "Fletcher," Colt said. "Yes, come here." The silence that followed was the longest one yet. Then the creak of the stool, movement in the dark. So slow and careful, the way a man moves when he is crossing a line he has been standing on the near side of for his entire life. Not carelessly, but with full deliberate knowledge of exactly what he is doing. He dropped to his knees in front of the bunk. Not from weakness, from something else entirely. Something that required being closer to the ground. His big hands found the edge of the bunk on either side of Colt's legs and held there. "Colt," he said, very low, very close. "Just don't tell anyone, please." The wind moved in the cottonwoods outside. The horse breathed slow in the stall. The moonlight came thin and silver through the boards of the barn and lay in long, pale lines across the floor between them. Colt put his hand against the side of Fletcher's face, the rough jaw, the careful, terrible hope in the dark. He could feel the man's pulse under his palm, fast and real, the pulse of something that had been waiting a very long time to be acknowledged. "No one to tell," Colt said. "It is just us out here." The wind moved in the cottonwoods and the horse breathed in the dark, and the moonlight lay in its thin silver lines across the floor of the barn, patient and indifferent the way moonlight always was, carrying no judgment in either direction, only light. And that was the truest thing Colt Duvain had said in 3 years, maybe in his whole life. Morning came the way it always did on the high plains, without ceremony and without apology, pressing its gray light through the gaps in the barn boards before the rooster had finished making his case for the day. Colt was already awake. He had been awake for some time, lying still in the particular stillness of a man who does not want movement to end something. Fletcher was gone. He had left sometime in the depth of the night, as quietly as he had come in. The stool sat empty in the place where he had knelt, and the only evidence that any of it had been real was the quality of the silence left behind, which was different from ordinary silence. It had weight and temperature. It was the silence of something that had happened and could not be made to unhappen, which was not a bad kind of silence, but not an easy one either. Colt sat up slowly and put his boots on and went out into the cold of the early morning. He did not look at the cabin. He fed the horses and checked the water trough and walked the east fence line to see how the posts from the previous days were settling. They were settling fine. Good work held. That was one of the reliable things about the world, and Colt had learned to be grateful for reliable things. When he came back in for breakfast, Clara had already put coffee and cornbread on the table. Fletcher sat at the far end, with a cup and a piece of the bread, and his eyes on the surface of the table, as though the grain of the wood required sustained study. He looked up when Colt came in, and then looked away in the same motion, smooth and fast, like something reflexive. Clara poured Colt's coffee and sat down and talked about the south pasture and the corn, and a rumor she had heard from the trading post about Critch buying up rangeland to the east. She talked the way capable women talked when they were managing a room, filling the air with useful things so the silence could not get a foothold. Colt appreciated it, as Fletcher seemed to also, the way a man appreciated solid ground after a long time on uncertain footing. After breakfast, Fletcher went out to the cattle. Colt stayed to help Clara clear the table, and she handed him a cloth for the dishes without asking, and they washed up side by side in the kind of quiet that did not need filling. After a while she said, without looking at him, "He has not slept well in years. He was better last night, whatever that means." Colt set a plate on the shelf and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would not be either a lie or a confession. "I know what I married," she said. Her voice carried no bitterness, none at all, which made it harder to hear than bitterness would have been. "He is a good man, and he has been kind to me every day of our life together. But there are things a person needs that kindness alone cannot reach." She handed him another dish. "I am not asking you to explain yourself, or him. I just want you to know that I have eyes and I am not afraid of what I see with them." She paused. "He deserves to be seen. I'm glad someone can." Colt looked at her for a moment. "You are a remarkable woman, Clara," he said. She smiled, small and real. "I know that," she said, and went back to the stove. He went out and found Fletcher at the cattle pen, leaning on the top rail watching his steers circle the enclosure with the slow bovine contentment of animals that had no opinions about anything except grass and water. Fletcher heard Colt coming, and his shoulders changed shape slightly, a tightening that was also a kind of bracing. Either way, a man prepared himself for a conversation whose shape he could not yet see. Colt leaned on the fence beside him and looked at the cattle and said nothing for a while. "Good animals," Colt said at last. Fletcher said, "Yes. Bought the 2 older ones off a drover passing through from the south 3 seasons back. The young one is from our own stock." His voice was level and careful, each word set down with intention. After a pause, Colt said, "You do not have to say anything about last night." Fletcher was quiet. His hands on the rail were tight. Then he said, slowly, like a man choosing his footing on uncertain ground, "What happened was real. I want you to know that. I'm not going to pretend otherwise." He stopped. "I have never allowed another person to be that close to me, in that particular way. Not in my whole life." The weight of those words landed quietly between them. Colt received them without moving. "That is a long time to carry something alone," Colt said. Fletcher's knuckles whitened on the rail. "Yes," he said. "It is. I'm not going anywhere," Colt said. "Not today. Not for a while." He paused. "I told you I would stay." Fletcher turned and looked at him. In the full morning light, his face was entirely exposed in a way that the darkness of the barn had not required of it. The hope there was harder to look at in daylight, more specific and undeniable, impossible to misread as anything other than exactly what it was. Colt held the look and did not look away and did not rush it. They stood at the fence in the early sun, not touching and not looking away. And the cattle moved in their slow circle below them, and the hawk out over the south pasture rode a column of warm air higher and higher without a sound. Then Fletcher turned back to the cattle, and Colt turned back to the cattle, and the morning resumed around them, wide and ordinary and ongoing. The trouble Colt had been watching for arrived 4 days later, and arrived in a form he had not specifically anticipated. He had expected more of Critch's hired hands, another visit with horses and bluster, and the theatrical menace of men paid to perform it. What arrived instead was a lone rider wearing a tin star. The deputy's name was Haskell. Young, lean, with the nervous energy of a man who had been handed authority recently enough that he had not yet decided what to do with it. He came alone and pulled up at the gate and called out, and Fletcher went to meet him, while Colt stayed by the barn and watched from a distance. The exchange lasted several minutes. Colt could not hear the words from where he stood, but he could read the body of it well enough. Haskell spoke. Fletcher listened with his arms at his sides and his expression closed. A folded paper changed hands. Fletcher read it and handed it back. More words. Haskell looked toward the barn, toward Colt, with the flat assessing look of a man cataloging what he saw. Colt looked back with the mild expression of a man who had nothing to hide and nowhere particular to be. Haskell wrote out. Fletcher walked back to the barn. He described what had been on the paper because he had read it carefully, and he remembered what he read. It was a notice from the county seat. A complaint had been filed by riders employed under the Critch brand, claiming unlawful battery against them on the premises of the Vane property. The county was notifying Fletcher that any further such incidents would be taken up before the circuit judge when he made his next pass through the territory, which was expected before the end of autumn. "So Critch is going through the law now," Colt said. Fletcher folded the description he had written and put it in his shirt pocket. "Critch owns the circuit judge," he said. "Has had his ear for years. Whatever he cannot take by force, he takes through the courthouse." Colt thought about that. "And the deputy. Which side is he on?" Fletcher considered the question with the fairness it deserved. "Haskell is not a bad man," he said. He is a young man in a territory where the wrong people hold the power. He does what he is told because he does not yet know how to do otherwise. That is different from doing it willingly." That distinction mattered. It was the kind of distinction that determined whether a man was an obstacle or a potential door, and they were entirely different problems. "There is a man," Fletcher said after a moment. "He runs the land office out of Cordon. Name of Purcell. He has been trying for 2 years to build a case against Critch to bring it before the Territorial Land Commissioner in the spring. He needs records of specific incidents, dates, names, what was done. Colt looked at him. You have those. Fletcher met his eyes. I have records of everything. Every fence line burned. Every animal I found dead in the pasture with no natural cause. See every visit from his men, and who was with them, and what they said. He paused. I have kept them because I believed eventually there would be a day to use them. I have been waiting on that day for 2 years. Colt said, when were you going to tell me? Fletcher looked at him with something that in a different man might have been the edge of a smile. You've only been here 9 days, he said. Colt allowed this was fair. All right, he said. So we take the records to Purcell. Fletcher nodded slowly. If Critch finds out before Purcell can act on it, the retaliation will be swift and it will not be another warning. He paused. It will be the kind of thing that ends a man. I understand that kind of thing, Colt said. I know you do, Fletcher said. He looked at Colt in the particular direct way that meant he was speaking about more than one layer of what was being said at once. I know you do. They rode into Cordon the following morning. Fletcher with the records in a leather satchel under his duster, and Colt riding beside him with his rifle across his saddle and his eyes on the trail behind them. The day was bright and dry, and red dust rose off the horses' hooves and hung in the still air. Cordon was a frontier town that had not yet decided what it meant to become. Raw timber buildings on a rutted main street, a livery, a saloon, a dry goods store, a church whose paint had been losing the argument with the weather. The people on the boardwalk watched Fletcher Vane with the look that people in small towns gave a man known to be in trouble with the powerful, in part sympathy and part the careful distance of those who did not want the trouble to spread. Purcell's land office was above the assay house at the far end of the street. He was a gray-haired man with spectacles and the worn, focused look of someone who had been fighting the same uphill battle long enough to stop being surprised by the grade. He looked up when they came in, and his eyes went immediately to the satchel. You have the records? He said. Not a question. 2 years of them, Fletcher said. He laid the satchel on the desk. Purcell pulled the papers out and began reading. He read with his finger moving along the lines and his lips occasionally shaping words without sound. After a long while, he looked up. You wrote down everything. Everything, Fletcher said. Purcell looked at Colt over the spectacles. And you have been present for the recent incidents. 3 of them, Colt said. I can put my mark to a statement. Purcell studied him the way a man studied a horse he was considering buying, thoroughly and without social pretense. You are not from this territory. No, Colt said. If this goes the direction I intend to push it, Purcell said, you may be called to appear before the commissioner in the spring. That is months away. He paused. I want you to understand what you are signing yourself to. Colt looked at Fletcher. Fletcher was looking at the records on the desk, at his 2 years of careful handwriting spread across Purcell's desk in the thin light from the window. I understand, Colt said. Something moved in the corner of Fletcher's expression, even small and controlled, and visible only to someone who had been paying the kind of attention Colt had been paying. Then I have what I need to write the complaint, Purcell said. He squared the papers and began sorting them with the brisk economy of a man who knew what to do now that he had the tools. He looked up one more time. In the meantime, both of you take care about who you speak to. Critch has ears in this town. If he learns what we are doing before the complaint reaches the commissioner, he will move to stop it. He paused. He will not be gentle about it. We understand that, Colt said. Purcell looked at him over the spectacles. I imagine you do, he said. They rode back in the long golden light of late afternoon. The sun was going orange at the edges, and the plain stretched out in every direction, flat and enormous and older than anything on it. Fletcher rode beside him, and neither of them spoke much, which was comfortable in the way that silences between people became comfortable once neither of them was performing anything for the other. After a while, Fletcher said, I did not expect you to say you would stay for the proceedings. For the complaint, Colt said. Fletcher was quiet a moment. Yes, he said, for the complaint. It was a careful exchange. both of them understanding what was being said around the edges of what was actually being said, and being careful with it, the way men were careful with things that mattered. "You could have ridden on any day this past week," Fletcher said. "Nothing held you here." "I know," Colt said. "Why did you stay?" Colt looked at the trail ahead. "The honest answer," he said, "is that I stopped knowing how to leave somewhere around the third day." Fletcher looked at him sidelong. In the fading gold light, his face was completely open in a way that Colt suspected it was not often open out in the daylight. Colt held the look and did not look away. Fletcher turned back to the trail. He did not say anything, but his shoulders had that releasing shape again, that specific letting go that Colt had come to recognize as the thing that happened to Fletcher when he stopped bracing against something. The ranch came up ahead of them, the dark shape of the cabin against the last color of the sky, the water tower, the barn, the yellow light already burning in the window. The dog came out to meet them down the track, small and solid and alive against the enormous dark of the plain. Colt looked at it and felt something settle in his chest that he did not immediately name, and did not need to. The days that followed had the texture of days with something building under them. They worked the ranch, the two of them. The things that had been put off and the things that needed doing before the first hard freeze came down from the North Country. They worked well together in the way they had from the start, without discussion, finding the rhythm and staying in it. Fletcher knew his land and his animals with the deep, easy knowledge of a man who had spent years attending to them. Colt knew work, and he knew how to read what another man needed done before being asked, which was a skill from the war that turned out to be useful in peaceable conditions also. Underneath the work, there was something else. Something that had been named in the dark of the barn and was still becoming in the daylight, moving through the space between them with the steady, quiet charge of a thing acknowledged and still unfolding. They were careful with it, the way you were careful with a new fire in high wind, not smothering it, but not letting the wind take it either. Clara moved through it all with her usual clear-eyed intelligence. She was one of the most perceptive people Colt had ever been in close proximity to. She had arranged her understanding of her life and her marriage into something that functioned by the honest internal logic of a woman who looked directly at things and called them what they were, and she had done it without bitterness and without theatrics, which was rarer than most people knew. One evening she came out to the barn while Colt was doing the last check on the horses, the evening brushdown that settled them for the night. "He has been different since you came," she said from the doorway. "Not different in a way that troubles me. Different the way a man is when he has been carrying more than his share, and someone has taken a portion without making a spectacle of it." She looked at him steadily. "He deserves to be seen," she said. "You're seeing him. That's enough for me." Colt looked at her in the lamplight. "Clara," he said. "I'm not asking for anything," she said. "Just wanted you to know that I see it too." She went back inside and the door closed softly, and the horses breathed in the warm dark, and the lamp put its small warm circle on the floor of the barn. The difficulty with Critch came on the fourth day, not in the form Colt had been watching for. He had expected another band of riders, another show of horses and rifles and the specific brutish confidence of men who were paid to be sure of themselves. What came instead was Critch himself. He was a large man, heavy through the chest and neck, with the look of someone who had once done hard physical work, and now used that frame purely as a vehicle for authority. He rode in with two men flanking him, but left them at the gate and came forward alone across the yard, which was its own kind of statement. A man who came alone was a man who believed he did not need backing for this particular conversation. Fletcher went out to meet him. Colt came and stood on the porch and crossed his arms and stayed there. Critch stopped in the yard and looked at Fletcher with the expression of a man making a considerable effort to appear reasonable. "Vane," he said, "I know you have been to see Purcell." Fletcher said nothing. "I understand the impulse," Critch said. His voice was smooth, the kind of smooth that took practice. A man feels the squeeze. He looks for whatever tool is near to hand. He spread his hands open, conciliatory. "But I want to talk direct with you before this goes somewhere it does not need to go." His eyes moved to Fletcher's. "I am willing to put more money on the table for the south pasture. A fair price. A price that would set your wife up comfortable for years. He paused. Walk away from this ranch and let me handle what needs handling, and there need not be any more unpleasantness between us. Fletcher's hands hung at his sides. Not tense, just present. The offer was always the problem, he said. The offer assumes I want to sell. I do not want to sell. My father worked this land, and I will work it, and after me, Clara will have it, and that is the end of the conversation about selling. Critch studied him. His smooth expression was doing more work now. After a moment, his pale eyes moved past Fletcher to the porch, to Colt. Who is that? A man who works here, Fletcher said. He was not here a month back. He is here now, Fletcher said. Critch looked at Colt with the long, flat calculation of a man who made it his business to know what he was dealing with. Then he looked back at Fletcher, and his voice dropped to something quieter and more particular. There are certain things that get spoken about in a territory like this, he said. Things about a man, his habits, his inclinations. He paused, deliberate. The kind of thing a circuit judge tends to hear before he hears anything else. The silence after that was the specific silence of a blade set down on a table. Colt stepped off the porch. He did it without rushing, without any sign that the words had struck anything, just moved from the porch to the yard, the way a man moved when he had somewhere to be, and was in no hurry about it. He came and stood beside Fletcher. Critch looked at him. Whatever it is you are thinking of saying, Colt said, his voice easy and entirely without give. I would think on it a spell longer before saying it. He let a moment pass. Because the only thing a man accomplishes by reaching into another man's private life and using what he finds there as a weapon is to show everyone watching what kind of man he truly is. And there are people watching. Critch was still. You rode out here to buy a piece of land, Colt said. The answer was no. You are thinking about making a threat. The answer to that is also no. He held Critch's eyes without blinking. So the only question left is whether you want to ride back to your spread as a man who made an offer and was refused, or as a man who tried something meaner than that and was still refused. He paused. The first way is better for you in every direction I can think of. A long silence. The 2 men at the gate had gone very still. The dog sat by the fence post and watched. Critch looked at Fletcher, then at Colt, then back at Fletcher. Something passed across his face and then closed over again, smooth and controlled. We will see what happens, he said. We will, Colt agreed. Critch turned and walked back to his men, and they rode south, and the red dust of their going rose and thinned and settled on the afternoon air. Fletcher stood where he was for a moment after they had gone. Then he said quietly, You didn't have to do that. I know, Colt said. What he was pointing at, Fletcher said. About. He stopped. I know what he was pointing at, Colt said. He watched the south road where the last of the dust was still hanging. It does not change anything. He paused. Things are what they are, whether someone speaks them out loud or not. The speaking of it only gives it power if you let it. Fletcher was quiet for a long stretch of time. The afternoon lay wide and still around them. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough in the way of a man who was feeling something larger than his usual means of containing it. I have been afraid of that my whole life, he said. What someone knowing would do, what it would cost me. He paused. I built this ranch partly so that I could be far enough from people that it would never have to matter. Colt looked at him. It costs what it costs, he said. But you pay it once, and then you are on the other side of it. He paused. It is the carrying of it alone that costs you every morning you wake up. Fletcher looked at him for a long time. In the afternoon light, his eyes were very dark and entirely open. None of the careful managed distance in them, none of the interior bracing. Just a man who had been standing at a fence for a very long time, looking at something on the other side of it and finally beginning to believe the fence was not as permanent as he had told himself it was. The weeks that followed had the slow grind of days being endured toward something. Purcell sent word through a trusted rider that the complaint and records had been dispatched northward by stage to reach the land commissioner's office before the first snow closed the passes. He advised Fletcher to stay visible on his land and make no trips that were not necessary. Colt stayed. He repaired the rest of the fence line, all of it. so that the Vane property was marked clean and solid from corner to corner. He helped Fletcher move the cattle to the south pasture before the grass on the north range gave out. He ate Clara's meals and slept in the barn and existed in the daily rhythms of the place with a naturalness that would have surprised him if he had stopped to examine it, which he carefully did not. Fletcher and he said very little about what was between them and were never not aware of it, the way you were never not aware of a fire in a room, regardless of whether you were looking at it. They found reasons to be in proximity through the work. They talked about the cattle and the grass and the weather and what Purcell's rider had said, and beneath those conversations ran the other conversation, the one that had no words yet but did not need them, the slow, patient learning of another person's specific weight and way of being in the world. One evening, late in the season, with the first cold of autumn beginning to find its way under the barn door at night, Fletcher came out and sat on the bunk beside Colt instead of on the stool, and the difference in that was not a small one. They sat without speaking for a while in the dark. The horses breathed in their stalls. Outside, the wind had begun to carry the smell of the coming cold. "I have been thinking," Fletcher said. Colt waited. "About what this looks like when it is finished," Fletcher said. "When Purcell's work is done, and Critch's answered, and the pasture is safe, and the land is settled." He paused. "I have been thinking about what I want." Colt looked at the boards in the dark. His pulse was doing something deliberate. Fletcher's hands were on his knees. "There are things I cannot change," he said quietly. "Clara chose me knowing what she was choosing, and she has been good and faithful, and I will not make her life harder than it needs to be." He paused. "But something has changed since you came, something about what I think is possible, about what I can let myself have." He stopped. "Yeah, I do not know how to be what I am in the open. I have never known. My whole life I have been afraid of what would happen if anyone saw it clearly." "It can happen," Colt said. "Being seen, clearly." He paused. "Without it destroying you?" Fletcher looked at him. "I know it can," he said quietly. "You have shown me that." He paused. "I would like you to stay. Not because of Critch or Purcell or the pasture. I would like you to stay because I do not want you to leave." Colt looked at him for a long moment. The thing that had been growing in the space between them since the first fire in the creek bed was fully present in the barn, acknowledged and specific and solid and real, the way it was when you stopped fighting a thing and simply let it be what it was. "Fletcher," Colt said. "Yes. I have been still in one place for going on 9 weeks. He paused. "That is the longest I have been still anywhere since the war." "I know," Fletcher said. "I stopped knowing how to leave," Colt said. "I told you that on the trail back from Cordon." "You did," Fletcher said. "I have been thinking about whether that is something that happened to me or something I chose," Colt said. He paused. "I think it is both. And I think that is the only way anything worth having ever happens. The choosing and the being chosen at the same time." Fletcher said nothing. He put his hand over Colt's on the edge of the bunk, his large, rough hand over Colt's in the dark, and he did not say anything because there was nothing that needed saying. The having said it was enough. The having heard it was enough. They sat that way for a long while. In the dark of the barn, with the thin moonlight laying itself across the floor in quiet silver lines, and outside the wind moved through the cottonwoods the way it always did, enormous and patient and old as the country itself, and they were 2 men inside it who had found each other on a dusty road by accident and stayed by choice, which was the only way anything in the West that was worth holding had ever truly been held. The letter from the commissioner's office came south with the last warm days of autumn, carried by a rider who also brought mail for 3 other ranches and a crate of dry goods for the Cordon store. Purcell sent word with it. The records had been reviewed and found sufficient. DeCritch's land claims in the south pasture and along the ridge had been found to rest on fraudulent survey documents filed with forged signatures. His men would be ordered off the disputed range before winter, and a formal accounting of his dealings in the territory would take place in the spring. Critch left the county before the first hard frost. He did not announce it, and he did not say farewell to anyone, because men of that particular sort never did. His crew scattered to other outfits and other territories, and within a fortnight the big house on his north property stood empty and quiet in the winter light, just a dark shape on the horizon that would eventually belong to someone else who would make something different of it or not. The south pasture stayed. The fence posts Colt and Fletcher had driven into the red earth held through the first storms of winter and looked, come spring, as though they had always been there. Colt built himself a room off the back of the barn, nothing elaborate, 4 plank walls and a good roof and a single window facing east to catch the morning light. He cut the timber himself from the stand of cottonwoods above the water tank, and he and Fletcher raised the frame on a Saturday in November, with the cold coming down off the hills to the north, and Clara bringing coffee out at midday. It went up solid and level, and when they drove the last nail home that afternoon, the light was going gold across the plain, and the cattle were lowing in the pen, and it was the kind of moment that did not require comment. Clara picked the door hinges herself at the dry goods store in Cordon on a Tuesday and brought them back wrapped in brown paper. "Good iron," she said, setting them on the table. "They will not rust in the wet." They did not rust. In the evenings, when the day's work was done and the stock were fed and the lamps were lit in the cabin, the 3 of them sometimes sat together on the porch and watched the darkness come down over the plain. They talked about the cattle and the grass and what the winter looked likely to be, and sometimes they did not talk at all, just sat in the particular quiet of people who had no more need to be careful around each other. And sometimes, after Clara had said her good night and gone inside and the lamp in the bedroom window had gone dark, Colt and Fletcher sat a while longer in the cold night air, shoulder to shoulder on the porch step, looking out at the enormous dark of the plain and the enormous sweep of stars above it. They did not always speak. They did not need to. The silence between them by then was the warm kind, the kind built up over months of shared work and shared trouble, and the slow, patient business of learning what another person truly was beneath what they showed the world. Colt had come west looking for distance. He had found it, years of it, wide and empty, and doing the job he needed it to do. And then a man had been lying in a ditch on a road he happened to be riding, and the distance had stopped being what he needed, and he had gotten off his horse. He had not gotten back on, not to leave, not yet. The plain stretched out in every direction, vast and indifferent and older than anything standing on it, and the ranch sat in the middle of it, small and lit and solid and ongoing, and the lives inside it and around it continued in the way lives continued, when they had found the shape they were always trying to find, not without hardship, not without the daily labor of keeping alive what had been built, but with the particular quiet rightness of things that were true, the kind of rightness you stopped looking for after a while, the kind that found you when you held still long enough. That was enough. In the end, it was more than enough. It was everything.